Right now, someone is collecting rent on a house worth $500,000 and losing money every single month. Not because they're bad at math, because the math they were shown in the first place was never the real math. On paper, being a landlord looks simple. You buy a house, you rent it out, the tenant's check covers the mortgage, and whatever's left over is profit. That's the story that gets sold in seminars, in YouTube comment sections, in family group chats where someone's cousin made a fortune flipping a duplex. But talk to landlords 3 or 5 years in, the ones who are honest with themselves, and a different picture shows up. Many of them are cash flow positive on paper and quietly bleeding money in reality. The rent check clears. The spreadsheet still says profitable. And somehow, at the end of the year, there's less money in the account than there was 12 months ago. This isn't a story about bad landlords or a housing crash. It's a story about the gap between rental income and rental profit, and the handful of costs that almost never make it into the pitch. Here's the calculation almost every new landlord runs first. Rent minus mortgage. That's it. A house with a $2,400 monthly mortgage payment, rented out for $3,000, looks like it's generating $600 a month, or roughly $7,200 a year. That number feels real because it's simple. It fits on a napkin. It's the number that gets repeated at dinner parties as proof that real estate is easy money. The problem is that a mortgage payment is not the cost of owning a house. It's one cost among several, and usually not even the biggest hidden one over time. The moment you own the property instead of just financing it, a second set of expenses shows up that has nothing to do with the bank and everything to do with the building itself. Every house is quietly a depreciating machine. Roofs last roughly 20 to 25 years. Water heaters last 10 to 15. HVAC systems often need major work or replacement within 15 to 20 years. None of these are dramatic disasters. They're just the ordinary cost of time passing. The standard rule of thumb among experienced property managers is to set aside somewhere between 1 and 4% of the home's value every year for maintenance and capital repairs, depending on the age and condition of the property. On a $400,000 house, that's a range of roughly $4,000 to $16,000 a year. Most new landlords budget closer to zero because nothing broke this month. Then, in year 4, the water heater fails on the same week. The tenant reports a slow roof leak. Suddenly, a profitable $600 a month property has swallowed 2 years of profit in a single quarter. The house didn't become unprofitable overnight. The cost was always there. It was just deferred, invisible, sitting in the walls waiting for its moment. The $600 a month profit calculation assumes something that almost never happens in real life. The house is rented every single month, with no gap between tenants. In reality, tenants move out. Units sit empty while they're cleaned, repainted, and relisted. Even in a strong rental market, a landlord might reasonably expect 2 to 4 weeks of vacancy between tenants. In a slower market, or after a difficult tenant, that gap can stretch to 2 or 3 months. A single month of vacancy on that $3,000 a month rental erases the entire year's projected profit. 2 months puts the property into the red for the year. And during vacancy, the mortgage, insurance, and property taxes don't pause. They keep running, whether or not anyone is paying rent. Property taxes and insurance are usually part of the mortgage payment, so they feel accounted for. But both tend to rise over time, often faster than rent does in a given lease term. Insurance premiums on rental properties have climbed sharply in many regions over the past several years, driven by increased repair costs and, in some areas, greater exposure to extreme weather. Meanwhile, rent increases are often capped by what the local market will bear, by lease terms, or in some places, by rent control regulations. So a landlord can end up in a slow-motion squeeze, costs rising every year on a fairly predictable schedule, income rising only when a lease renews, and sometimes not even then if raising the rent risks losing a reliable tenant. That gap between rising fixed costs and sticky income is one of the quietest profit killers in the entire business. It doesn't show up as a single bad month. It shows up as margin that erodes a little more each year, until a property that looked comfortable in year 1 looks tight in year 5. Every time a tenant leaves, there's turnover. Cleaning, paint, sometimes new flooring or appliances. Property managers often estimate turnover costs somewhere in the range of 1 to 2 months' rent, once labor and materials are factored in. Then there's the tenant who doesn't pay on time or stops paying at all. Eviction processes vary widely, but in many places they take anywhere from 1 to several months to complete, during which the landlord is covering full carrying costs on a unit that's producing no income, sometimes while also absorbing legal fees. None of these show up in the simple rent minus mortgage formula. They only show up in the bank account months later as a mystery drop that gets blamed on a bad year instead of understood as a structural part of the business. Landlords and real estate investors who track this properly tend to use a fuller version of the equation: rental income minus mortgage, minus a maintenance reserve, minus an average vacancy allowance, minus property management if it's used, minus insurance and tax increases, minus an average annual turnover cost. What's left after all of that is closer to real profit. Run that fuller equation on the same $3,000 a month house, and the $7,200 a year napkin profit often shrinks dramatically, sometimes down to a few $100s a year, sometimes into negative territory, especially in the early years when a big repair or a rough tenant can hit before enough of a reserve has built up. That doesn't mean the property is a bad investment. Real estate still tends to build wealth over time, mostly through appreciation and mortgage paydown, rather than monthly cash flow. But the monthly profit many landlords think they're earning is often smaller and more fragile than the spreadsheet suggests. Part of why this gap survives is that the good years and bad years don't average out neatly in any given landlord's head. A landlord who goes 3 years without a major repair genuinely believes the math works, because for them, so far it has. Then year 4 arrives with a new roof, and it feels like bad luck rather than the cost finally showing up on schedule. The other part is that a lot of the advice circulating publicly comes from people selling something: a course, a coaching program, a how I built my portfolio story. Those stories tend to lead with the rent minus mortgage number because it's the most impressive one, not because it's the most accurate one. None of this means owning rental property is a bad idea. It means the version of the math that gets repeated most often, rent minus mortgage equals profit, was never the full picture. Real profitability includes the roof that hasn't failed yet, the tenant who hasn't moved out yet, and the month of vacancy that hasn't happened yet. If you're a tenant, this explains a lot about why rent increases can feel disconnected from anything happening to you personally. If you're thinking about becoming a landlord, the real question isn't, does the rent cover the mortgage? It's, does the rent cover the mortgage, the reserve, and the bad year that's coming eventually? The math doesn't lie. It just doesn't get shown in full very often. If you own a rental property, or you're thinking about buying one, drop your real numbers in the comments. What your actual maintenance and vacancy costs have looked like. And if this changed how you think about the math, consider subscribing for more breakdowns like this one.